aircraft is the best aircraft that we can provide our men and women in uniform, and this government is committed to giving them the very best.
It's a lethal node on the internet of the battle space.
The F-35 is nothing but a bomb truck.
I don't understand why Canada wants to have a stealthy bomber.
Governments have already put over $150 million into it. Why would you now consider buying anything else?
We would cancel that sole source process.
This is procurement, twisted and manipulated, and I don't know where it comes from.
Hello, I'm Scott Taylor. I'm a former Canadian soldier, a journalist, and since 1988, the publisher of Esprit de Corps magazine. There's little doubt Canada needs a new fleet of fighter jets. But which one, and at what cost? Those questions have touched off a major political dogfight in this country between those who say we are investing too much in one aircraft and those who say the F-35 is the right fighter at the right price with the right spin-off benefits for Canada's aerospace industry and its workers. Over the next hour, we'll hear from all sides. We'll get exclusive access to the most advanced aerial fighting machines on the planet. And we'll ask some serious questions about a very secretive purchasing process. This is F-35, the politics of procurement. The F-35 Lightning II is marketed as the world's only fifth-generation multi-role fighter. Without revealing the criteria for its choice, the Harper government has decided the F-35 is the only aircraft that can meet Canada's needs to replace our aging fleet of CF-18 Hornets. But does the F-35 and its industrial benefits program represent the best overall package for Canada at the best price for Canadian taxpayers? These are some of the questions we seek to answer. July 16th, 2010. On this otherwise quiet midsummer's day, Canada's Minister of Defence enters a packed hall to make an announcement. He is about to commit Canada to the single largest military equipment purchase in Canadian history and fulfill a long-standing commitment to renew Canada's Air Force with a new advanced fighter aircraft.
Ladies and gentlemen, as Minister of National Defence, I'm extremely proud to announce that the Government of Canada is delivering on that promise, committing today to acquire 65 Joint Strike Fighter F-35 Lightning II aircraft to meet the security challenges of the 21st century. Yes. We are exercising our option under the Memorandum of Understanding entered into in early 2000 with the Joint Strike Fighter partner nations, the United States, Britain, Italy, the Netherlands, Australia, Denmark, Norway, and Turkey. We expect to begin taking delivery of the aircraft, the first F-35 Lightning II, in 2016. Together with infrastructure, training, simulators, weapons, and other items, our investment is valued at approximately $9 billion. This is one of the largest defense procurement projects in the history of Canada.
The plane's manufacturer provided $1 million backdrop for the occasion, a full-scale model of the F-35. The Defence Minister's decision to jump into the deal, especially while Parliament was in summer recess, was met with sharp criticism from the opposition.
If he thought that it was politically so positive, why did he wait to announce it until Parliament had adjourned last June? And then sort of in a July news conference when people are at the cottage or planning their summer holidays, he suddenly announces the largest ever military procurement in Canadian history as a sole source, non-competitive process.
In March of this year, a significant upgrade.
Just 2 months before the announcement, the NDP's defence critic questioned the government about its plans to replace Canada's fleet of CF-18 fighter jets following a $2.6 billion midlife upgrade.
We continue to hear rumors of immediate plan to replace those jets. Can you tell us what the expected life of the useful life of these F-18s that we just finished refurbishing and modernizing? What would that be from here on in, Mr. Chairman?
When the legitimate question was asked in the House of Commons in May of this year during the estimates to the Minister himself, tell us about the procurement of the replacement for the F-18, he was the one who put it on the record and made it clear that regardless of our participation in the Joint Strike Fighter development project, which was a development project, there would still be a competition, an open, transparent competition on the replacement of the F-18.
This next generation fighter will be, again, an open, competitive, transparent process that will see us receive the best capability to provide that capability to the best pilots in the world.
2 months later, the government announced during the summertime that they had made a decision to sole source the F-35, that they were bypassing the competition process, and that this was the best plane for Canada, and then proceeded to, after the fact, claim that there had been a competition 10 years before.
There was a competitive process. That process took place some time ago. It was a very competitive and, in fact, a rigorous process that was decided in favor of the F-35 Lightning II.
I think that that's a total sham. The competition that took place was an American competition to decide who was going to develop this particular plane. That decision was made. Canadians were essentially onlookers to that process, had no say in the decision making, and in fact, it was done 10 years before Canada had even committed itself to buying that plane.
The competition both Harris and McKay were referring to was a multi-billion-dollar contest between Boeing's X-32A and Lockheed Martin's X-35 over which company would develop the Joint Strike Fighter. In 2001, after exhaustive testing, selection teams from the United States and Britain gave the win to Lockheed Martin's X-35. It was to become the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter.
This competition, the one whereby the Americans and the Brits selected Lockheed Martin over Boeing, was a competition to decide which of these two companies would build this aircraft to meet the needs that were defined by the Americans and by the Brits. This had nothing at all to do with which aircraft would best be able to meet Canada needs 2 decades later. And to suggest that is just wrong, and I think everybody knows, the involved knows that that's not true, so to perpetuate that is I think, frankly, unconscionable.
Our predecessors chose the Lightning because they believed it was the best aircraft for Canada, a measure which we supported because it was and is the right thing to do.
In 1997, the then Liberal government of Mr. Chrétien agreed to participate in the development portion of the F-35 with a number of other countries. I think we sort of took a mid-level position in terms of the development money that we were going to put in. And that's benefited Canadian aerospace companies by almost $500 million, I think. So that was a wise decision and a good decision. But the decision to ultimately buy only that airplane was not made in 1997. It was made after Parliament shut down last summer when Peter MacKay announced that he was doing that with a sole source, no public competition process.
With partisan politics clouding the issue, we sought some clarity from the man who brought Canada into the Joint Strike Fighter program.
We committed $100 million of National Defence's money. We got $50 million from Industry Canada. And we invested it into the program, purpose being essentially that the rules of the game were that if you didn't participate in the program, your industry would not be entitled to bid on any contracts in the program. And at the time, the program was considered the largest procurement in U.S. history, $200 billion. It was going to be huge. And when we looked at it at that time, it was clear to me that we couldn't not be part of the program. Of course, at that time, there was no discussion at all about replacing our F-18s with this one. It was simply, let's get into it, our industry will benefit, and at the same time, we'll learn about what's going on, the latest in materials, the latest in avionics. We'll learn a lot, too, that can help us if and when we're ready to start a program to replace our F-18s.
Following the July 2010 announcement, the Harper government launched an unprecedented public relations offensive to sell the F-35 deal to the public. While on his annual Arctic tour, the Prime Minister raised the specter of the Russian boogeyman coming over the pole.
As you know, as you may have heard, 2 Russian aircraft were identified north of Inuvik. They came as close as 30 nautical miles from Canadian soil. 2 CF-18 Hornets shadowed them until they turned around, and thanks to the rapid response of the Canadian forces, at no time did the Russian aircraft enter Canadian sovereign airspace.
You have a plane that's 20 years older than I am, that's flying very slowly and noisily across the Canadian Arctic, allegedly, and somehow we need to have a stealth attack fighter to go and deal with this great threat. Makes no sense at all. And if the Russians, by the way, with whom we participate in joint Air Force and naval training exercises all the time, are in fact an identifiable enemy of Canada's, we better get a lot more than 65 stealth fighters if we plan to deal with the Russian Air Force.
Canadian government policy itself says there is no military challenge in the Arctic. I just sat at a presentation by the U.S. general who's in charge of NORAD and Northern Command. He said the same thing. He said, in the U.S., we do not see any military challengers in the Arctic. And he said that he agreed with Canadian policy that pointed out the same thing.
The real need for the F-35 goes far beyond that. It goes into expeditionary operations by the Canadian forces, by land forces, by naval forces, where air cover is going to be very, very important in the future. There is a whole range of possible scenarios where the F-35 will be valuable to Canada, both in operations but as a deterrent, and that's an element that can't be totally ignored. So protection of Canadian sovereignty both in the Arctic and in fact over the main landmass of Canada is important, but there's a much bigger story than that.
But it was the capabilities of the F-35 and the industrial benefits that could flow from the purchase of the aircraft that became the centerpiece of the Prime Minister's campaign.
For the last 13 years, through governments both liberal and conservative, Canada has been fully involved in the development, the design, and initial production phases of this world-class aircraft. Governments, beginning with our predecessors, have already put over $150 million of taxpayers' money into it. The prototypes are in the air. So you have to ask yourselves, why would you now consider buying anything else? Today there is nothing else like the F-35 Lightning.
With such polarized opinions about the F-35's potential tactical applications, we went to the home base of the Lightning II to hear directly from the manufacturer about the capabilities of this aircraft. Home to some 14,000 workers, this sprawling facility traces its aircraft roots back to the early days of the Second World War. The pride in that aviation legacy, as defined by the company motto at the entrance, is evident throughout the plant. But the focus is on the future, symbolized by Lockheed Martin's international partnerships, the cornerstone of which are the 9 member countries of the Joint Strike Fighter program. In December 2010, Defense Minister Peter MacKay came here to Lockheed Martin's main production plant in Fort Worth, Texas. After touring the facility, he declared to Canadians that this project would be on budget and on time. To learn more about the program and to make our own assessments, we've come here as well.
The guys on the ground are going to be able to sit there and see almost exactly what we're seeing in the cockpit.
Wow. We were given a private tour of the latest F-35 to come off the assembly line. This is a conventional takeoff and landing variant, the same model Canada intends to buy.
We had chasing out at Edwards with two-tanked F-16s.
The chief test pilot for the Lightning II, Bill Gigliotti, provided us with the ultimate insider's guide to the performance and technical capabilities of the aircraft.
When you look at the aircraft, it was designed from those tires up to be a stealthy airplane. So the weapon bay doors, every part of this airplane was designed around denying the threat's ability to detect you with radar. If you deny that ability of early detection, then you, in time, now have the ability to be offensive. And that's what this airplane allows you to do.
Now, how does it compare in terms of the amount of payload it's allowed to carry compared to other aircraft?
Well, we exceed them.
Okay.
I mean, right now, this F-35, with its full internal fuel load, carries the same fuel load as an F-18 with 3 tanks. We carry it internally. Plus, we load stores internally. We can carry 2,000-pound bombs inside, one on each side, plus an AMRAAM. Allows us both an air-to-air and air-to-ground capability with all that internal fuel, which allows range and endurance, which allows us persistence over the battlefield. A big problem with our ground forces, because this aircraft is going to operate in very close concert with ground forces. During the 2nd, 3rd, 4th day of the war, when we no longer need to count on that LO signature, we can load the aircraft up with up to 18,000 pounds of external stores without having to put tanks on it. When we put tanks on an aircraft, we take up a weapon station. We don't have to do that on this jet.
And he says the plane offers Air Force generals a strategic offensive edge.
It's designed for the generals who are going to fight wars. They want the biggest tool. They want to bring out the hammer and say, boom, I'm going to knock that threat out right now.
Now, in your experience, having flown all sorts of different aircraft, what is it that this aircraft can provide that no other aircraft can?
Well, first off, stealth. When we build an aircraft from stealth, we have to design it from the ground floor up, and we did that with this aircraft. This aircraft embodies all the best of the legacy tile or older fighters that I've had the opportunity to fly. It encompasses the best of the weapon systems from how they operate and how we bring that information to the pilot and display it, to the best of how those airplanes flew or still fly. And we've accompanied them and wrapped them in a stealthy structure like the F-35 has. So you take all the best of that way those airplanes fly, both in performance and handling qualities, which is the way we pilots think of how well they perform and handle to our inputs. And we wrap that in a stealthy design like the F-35, and you make a threshold difference in what you used to have to what the F-35 brings you in a 5th-gen fighter.
And what about its handling capabilities?
Well, like I said, this aircraft here, the F-35, handles as good or better than any legacy fighter. From the landing standpoint, the aircraft is the easiest aircraft I've ever seen to land. From the way it rolls like an F-16, which is a phenomenal and quick and responsive, agile fighter.
For a layperson's audience, I mean, what does this stealth capability allow this fighter to do in terms of tactical deployment? I mean, what is it that makes it an edge that people would want to have?
We have a sanctuary that we never had before. And that sanctuary is the inability for them to detect us in the time to react to the aircraft. And in that time, we buy ourselves the opportunity to employ our weapon system, which is far beyond where the legacy aircraft are. So not only can they not detect us, but we're employing weapons well before we were previously because of the weapon system we have on the airplane. It's sort of like a fighter going into a ring and fighting an opponent with one hand tied behind his back, and oh, by the way, now we're going to put a blindfold on them. So they can't see and they can't hit you. We're just taking sucker punches, so to speak. And it's unfair, and we like it that way.
During our visit, officials also stressed the wealth of opportunities available to Canadian industry. One example being that components of the tail fin assembly are being produced by a Canadian company. The backbone of this mile-long assembly line is state-of-the-art hydraulic hoists, which are also made in Canada. Aircraft of all 3 variants are already coming off the line here, but it will be some time before the company reaches its target of producing 1 F-35 per day.
We may succeed as a company, but this airplane helps our country succeed.
And they say the benefits for Canadian industry are only just beginning.
Today we have about $320 million in contracts, active contracts on the program, several years before Canada has to actually procure the airplane. When you extend those contracts over the life of the production program and you allow other opportunities that Canada will have to bid on additional work, the projected value of that is somewhere on the order of about $12 billion. That far exceeds the acquisition price of the airplanes.
Back in Canada, industrial benefits have been showcased as one of the major advantages Canada gains from being inside the Joint Strike Fighter program.
We know this is the best deal long-term over the next 40 years. It's a long-term deal for the Canadian taxpayer. And we know especially it's the best deal because we hear it from everybody in the Canadian aerospace industry. $12 billion of potential benefits for this country.
We will take one series of questions.
In the fall of 2010, the CEOs of Canada's largest aerospace companies participated in a joint media event to voice their support for the purchase of the F-35.
As chairman of the Aerospace Industries of Canada, I'm proud to be here today to support the acquisition of new jet fighters for our Canadian forces.
In addition to the tremendous benefits that will come with the purchase of 65 aircraft, this decision represents an even greater opportunity for Canadian industry to have access to work on thousands of planes. Canada is going to see long-term benefits that come with the economies of scale that a program this size delivers, and even greater opportunities based on this timely government decision because of the technology transfers that facilitates.
Determining which aircraft you're going to buy on the basis of what industry is telling you in your own country, what the CEOs want, is always the absolute worst reason to buy something. And that's where big mistakes always occur, when you try to buy military equipment based on industrial or commercial kind of criteria.
The major reason you buy something is because it meets the needs of the military. So I would never, ever agree that because something benefits this company or that company, we should buy it. That is totally putting things totally backwards. You buy it because it's the best one. Now, having said that, you know, in terms of industrial regional benefits, we're doing dramatically worse through this than we would through a competition.
Canada has done very well. We've doubled our money on how much has been invested to date, and so Canadian manufacturers have found this to be a very successful process so far for them. Your email.
Senator Colin Kenny, former chair of the Senate Defense Committee, contrary to his own Liberal Party's position, supports the government's choice of the F-35, especially as it pertains to the program's industrial benefits.
Now what we have a chance at getting is a world product mandate for a portion of the aircraft. Maybe it's the wings, maybe it's the tail structure. I mean, I don't know what portions we're going to bid for, but normally what we get back is 100% offset on a purchase. But it's not necessarily anything to do with the aircraft that we're buying. It's what we'd normally get back is 100% of the price that we paid for the aircraft, but it could just as easily be in garbage can lids or in wheel frames or all sorts of things that have absolutely nothing to do with aerospace work. And what I like about this is, however many are sold worldwide, we will have a chance to bid for building our piece of the plane for all of them, and the work will be aerospace. So I think that Canada, that's what appealed to me most, and I think Canada gets a special benefit that way rather than the usual offset arrangement that we see.
What Lockheed has done is very much like a Ponzi scheme. They've run around to the 8 foreign purchasers making these promises of future deals that'll aid your aerospace industry. And just like in a Ponzi scheme, there's going to be some winners and there's going to be some losers. And Canada doesn't know which it's going to be. You're up against the Israeli aerospace industry. You're up against European aerospace industry. Good luck. We'll see what comes out the other end.
All of the countries that are involved in Joint Strike Fighter have been given a part of the work share. So you do really wonder, actually, how effective that's going to be.
Across the Atlantic, Britain's commitment to the Joint Strike Fighter program dwarfs that of Canada. Internationally respected defense analyst Paul Beaver explains.
Well, the United Kingdom's romance with the Joint Strike Fighter began about 10 years ago. The United Kingdom wanted to become a Tier 1 partner with America, which meant it invested over £2 billion sterling in the development of the Joint Strike Fighter, and companies like BAE Systems and Rolls-Royce would benefit from orders that were placed around the world.
Britain's Parliament had originally indicated it would purchase 140 F-35 fighters to be deployed on 2 new aircraft carriers. But after a major strategic defense review, Britain has decided it can only afford to operate 1 aircraft carrier.
We will end up having 1 carrier at sea at one time. The other carrier will be laid up, and then there will be a shuffle across. This has meant that both the Joint Strike Fighter's total number in the inventory will be reduced to something like between 56 and 65, depending on what we can afford. And the United Kingdom actually doesn't know what it can afford because it doesn't know what the price is going to be yet.
And the fewer planes Britain orders, the higher the cost per plane for all the other JSF partner nations.
I think the price of Joint Strike Fighter, as countries tend to shrink their orders, and remembering that people have not fully signed up to Joint Strike Fighter, I think it will put the price up. And the problem is we don't actually know what that price is now, so we've no idea what it could be in the future.
The cost per aircraft is without doubt the most politically sensitive element of the F-35 procurement. The original objective of the Joint Strike Fighter program was to keep the cost per plane to $50 million. But by the time the Canadian government announced its decision to purchase the F-35 in July 2010, the estimated cost was $75 million. In March 2011, the U.S. Government Accountability Office upped the estimate to between $110 and $115 million. In that same month, the Parliamentary Budget Officer dropped his own bombshell with an estimate of between $148 and $163 million per plane.
D&D is talking about an acquisition cost right now, something in this roughly $70 million per plane. Whereas when we look at the unit cost for these planes between 2016 and 2022, and again based on methodologies and assumptions that are highlighted, we think that the cost could be in the $148–49 million range, which is obviously a lot higher, more than twice as high as what the Canadian government is saying.
Because the government did not release the detailed financial data behind their own costing formula, Page had to rely on historical trends of combat aircraft costs to arrive at his estimate.
When you looked at in terms of weight, I think in 1950 was like $1,000 US dollars and $2,009 per kilogram. Today it's like $10,000 per kilogram in 2009 dollar terms. So that's been exponential growth.
Simple fact is we disagree with some of Mr. Page's methodology. We don't plan on buying airplanes by the pound. He said himself it was a speculative report. He's done some speculation, and then he's drawn conclusions based on the speculation. We don't think that's a sound methodology, and there's areas in that report that we simply just disagree with.
Mr. Dan Russ, Associate.
The head of military procurement for national defense issued his own report, in which he suggests the cost per aircraft should eventually fall in line with government estimates.
As we go from early low-rate production to large-scale, efficient, full-scale production, what is the rate of decrease? Will that rate of decrease come down to the estimates that have been made? And the estimates that have been made are in the 70 million range for the least costly variant.
The trend lines are up. And I think Washington's moved on, so it's kind of hard for us to understand how the Canadian government could get a plane for $70 million when, even Washington is much higher than that.
As the economy recovers.
But despite ballooning estimates from the U.S. Government Accountability Office and our own Parliamentary Budget Officer, the Prime Minister is convinced that Canada's original cost estimates still stand.
There are cost increases involved in the United States that do not have any impact on us. We're buying these jets at a time where the production costs will be continuing to fall. We have significant contingencies, and all the information suggests we're well within the cost estimates for these jets, which we need.
Whereas his contract, He says he can get airplanes for the lower to mid $70 million per airplane, and buy a lot of support for that, additional $9 billion memorandum of understanding you've signed. You've signed no contract. You ain't got no commitment for that price at all, and you're not going to get it. Canada will get a benefit and not pay for some of the development costs for this airplane, but you will be extremely lucky to get an operating airplane for twice the $70 million your government is testifying to.
The cost of the F-35, best way to think about it is it has a very unique costing model. The model is that the international participants will pay exactly the same thing as the U.S. government pays at the time of purchase. So today we're estimating forward into 4 or 5 years in the future to give you a budgetary estimate on how much to plan for the airplane.
While there are widely divergent views over the cost of the aircraft, Parliament's budget officer does agree with the government that the F-35 meets the needs of the military as written in the still unreleased Statement of Requirements.
When we got a copy of this unclassified version of the Statement of Requirements, we vetted it with experts, and I think all we were able to really determine was that it did meet the Statement of Requirements. We didn't rule out any other planes. So in our study, we didn't say, plane X or plane Y would not meet it. But this plane certainly does meet, the mandatory requirements that were set out in the Statement of Requirements.
But critics say the process by which the F-35 was selected was flawed.
D&D and the government decided several years ago that they wanted to buy the F-35. In 2010, they wrote an SOR to fit that. This is not an unheard of process, unfortunately, in government. But in reality, you're supposed to write your requirements, and then you find out who's eligible.
That is a perversion of the system. The system has been hijacked. Years before you've defined your requirements, you're already advising the minister with a certain solution. And by the way, back then, the program, the Joint Strike Fighter, isn't developed today. 4 years earlier, it wasn't developed, virtually at all.
Laurie Hahn is a former fighter pilot, and by default, the government's lone spokesman on the F-35 purchase.
And we're looking now at what the government's position is as far as what the aircraft are going to cost per unit in the mid to low 70s million per unit. How is it that you remain convinced that Canada is still going to get those aircraft at that price, given that the U.S. law forbids it from selling to foreign countries at a lower price than they buy themselves?
Very good point. The price in the GAO is the average price of the airplanes, starting with the very first airplane, which was about $250 million. They're talking all three variants, not the CTOL variant, which is our airplane. So the prices, the average obviously comes down drastically because the first airplanes are always very expensive. And yes, we don't pay any more or any less than the U.S. Air Force. That's who we'll be buying with, pays in a given year. That's why we're moving our aircraft acquisitions out to the point where the production is highest, the price is lowest. USAF will be buying the airplanes at the same price, which is going to be substantially less than what you're seeing in the GAO report, because that mixes all three variants and it takes into account the cost of the very first airplane. That's not what applies to our program and our airplanes.
Serving members of the military also jumped into the fray. The Chief of the Air Staff, Lieutenant General Andre Deschamps, authored a feature article for the Canadian Military Journal. In the article, Deschamps claims that he is fully convinced that this is the right fighter aircraft for Canada. According to the General, the F-35 is the only aircraft that meets Canada's mandatory needs and the only fifth-generation aircraft available to Canada. He dismissed critics of the sole source acquisition process by pointing out a robust competition resulted in Lockheed Martin being chosen to produce the JSF in 2001. Deschamps also quoted a figure of a cost per aircraft in the low to mid $70 million range, arguing that the JSF offers the best value of any fighter available to Canada.
The government has argued that we've got into this because it's the best aircraft at the best price. No, that is absolutely, as of this date, totally not true. In terms of capability, nobody knows what this aircraft is going to be able to do or not to do. It's still in development. The development is many, many years behind. And so to suggest it's this aircraft today is frankly not true at all. As for the best price, We do not know what this is going to cost. The costs have risen dramatically. And whether it's going to cost 70 million, 80 million, 90 million, 100 million, nobody can tell you for sure. And nobody can tell you for sure what the annual maintenance cost is going to be.
But it wasn't only serving members of the military that came out in force. Retired Air Force generals also added their voices in support of the F-35.
Well, of course, Canada could buy an aircraft that is less capable, possibly cheaper, not necessarily, that isn't able to do the things that the F-35 will do exceptionally well. But then the whole expenditure of $10, $15, $20 billion would be a complete waste of money because it wouldn't be able to do the job. The air staff in National Defense Headquarters, according to my information, has spent years examining the requirement, examining the alternative airplanes that might be available to Canada, and they've concluded that the F-35, because it's a whole generation ahead of any competitive aircraft out there, is the only one that would do the job efficiently. Any other choice to Canada would involve a waste of taxpayers' money.
It's unprecedented to have military officers and Air Force people out campaigning for this particular jet in the public mind. That's unusual. I don't like to see that because I think it takes away from the civilian role of the oversight of military expenditures, military matters totally, decisions about what we do as a country. And I think that's a direction that we haven't gone in before.
You are here to discuss some extremely important issues that affect...
The defense minister as well continued his own offensive to promote the Lightning II as the best and only aircraft which can meet Canada's needs.
Everything that I have seen about this aircraft, and I've been down to the plant in Texas, in Fort Worth, I've received numerous briefings on the capability of this aircraft, I've seen the simulators, everything that I've seen leads me to believe that this aircraft will dominate the airspace over North America, and that's what we need.
While there are a multitude of voices, it seems clear they're all singing from the same songbook. The first verse being that the F-35 is the only fifth-generation fighter available to Canada.
The F-35 is the only available aircraft on the market, available to Canada, that falls into that category that's called fifth generation.
There is only one fifth-generation aircraft available to us.
But what defines a fifth-generation fighter?
Well, a fifth-gen fighter is what we call the next generation. And it has a number of attributes to it, one of which is stealth. It's certainly not the only one. The airplane has a multispectral suite of sensors on it that allows it to operate day or night, any environment. And when we can fuse the information from those sensors together, we have a much higher level of situational awareness for the pilot.
You as a former fighter pilot, can you explain to me just what constitutes a fifth-generation aircraft?
Well, basically what separates this airplane from an airplane like the Super Hornet, for example, is very low observability, i.e. stealth. The airplane is incredibly hard to detect. An F-35 will see and kill an F-18 at several times the range that the F-18 will even see the F-35. So that's a measure there. The other one is systems fusion. In an airplane like the F-18, which I'm familiar with, you know, the pilot is processing the radar, the fire control system, the communication systems, the moving map, all that kind of stuff. He's coordinating that in his head. In the F-35, all those systems talk together, so what the pilot gets is the final solution. So it's much more user-friendly in that respect. The third one, big difference, is the communications capability, the ability to transfer information from your airplane to other airplanes, the ability to receive information automatically, to transmit through AWACS to some other force or some other airplane, for AWACS to transmit information into your airplane. Just the connectivity that we would have with that airplane is like nothing we've got now.
Lockheed likes to use that terminology, fifth-generation fighter, stealth, and other buzzwords to paint an aura around this airplane that it is some sort of high-tech wonder weapon. It's nothing of the sort.
American defense analyst Winslow Wheeler submitted written testimony to the House of Commons Defense Committee outlining his serious concerns about the F-35. He remains one of the harshest critics of the plane, in part because it is designed to be a multi-role aircraft.
If you look at how multi-role airplanes perform, they do lots of things, everything poorly. Because of the weight added to make it a competent bomber. It's a poor fighter. Because of some of the characteristics you need as a fighter, it ain't such a great bomber. And because you're fixated on that, as a close air support airplane, it has none of the characteristics that you need for an effective close air support airplane, one with long loiter, lots of fuel, can fly very slow, very low, can withstand hits from air defenses. This airplane can do none of those things.
But to its supporters, the F-35's stealth capability is the main selling feature.
An aircraft with stealth has an enormous tactical advantage over other aircraft. That's very important for the survivability of the pilot, because the stealth aircraft will be the one that gets its missile away first, and therefore he will survive. But it also means more mission effectiveness for the aircraft. There's nothing sinister about stealth. It's a technology which has moved very rapidly. It's highly advanced. Yes, it does involve additional measures to protect the stealth qualities of the airplane, but this is something that's been done for a number of years, is well developed, and is quite manageable.
Canadian defense analyst Steve Staples of the Ottawa-based Rideau Institute questions why Canada's future Air Force requires stealth capability at all.
The F-35 is nothing but a bomb truck. It's designed to be loaded up with weapons, scream in over the beaches on the first night of a war, and drop those bombs on cities or military targets and get out. It's shock and awe. We saw it in 2003 in Baghdad. That's what the plane is for. It's not for Arctic sovereignty. It's not for patrolling Canadian coastline. It's about being interoperable with the U.S. military and their global designs.
Now, the stealth capability, coming back to that, that's something which gives us a whole different tactical ability. I mean, something which people are questioning whether Canada's doctrine is going to change, wherein you could foresee us using that first strike capability. Do you personally foresee us changing that doctrine?
Well, it's not necessarily first strike, and I bring up Libya. You know, we don't know what's going to happen, where we're going to be in the next 20, 30, 40 years. A month ago, if we'd said we'd be dropping bombs in Libya, you know, people would have said, you're crazy. The Libyans, in fact, we found out, have some very advanced surface-to-air missile capabilities, you know, from the Russians, obviously. So we don't know the kind of threats we're going to be facing down the road. So it's not necessarily first strike. It's the fact that we're going to be operating potentially in environments with some very sophisticated threats that we need to be able to counter.
If a competition to replace our aging fighter fleet were to be held, what would Canada's options be? The Boeing Super Hornet is the latest successor to the CF-18 Hornets, currently in Canadian service. The plane's similarities to its predecessor offers ease of pilot training and maintenance, placing it at the top of the list. And there is the Eurofighter Typhoon. It's pricey at $158 million a copy, but this operational aircraft is in service with 4 NATO countries as their primary air-to-air interceptor. Also in the running would be Sweden's next-generation Saab Gripen. The multi-role fighter is designed specifically to meet all of NATO's interoperability requirements. While the Saab Gripen would undoubtedly be a long shot in any Canadian-held competition, the frontrunner in such a scenario remains the Boeing Super Hornet. To find out what this aircraft could offer the Canadian Air Force, we ventured to the gateway to the West, St. Louis, Missouri. In this blue-collar, economically depressed Midwestern city, Boeing has an enormous presence.
We're here at the headquarters of Boeing Defense, Space and Security in St. Louis, Missouri, the single largest employer in the region with some 13,000 workers, many of whom are engaged in the production of the F-18 Super Hornet.
We met with the Super Hornet's chief test pilot, Ricardo Traven, who offered us a brief tour of the company's corporate museum hall. Before coming to Boeing, Traven spent 18 years as a fighter pilot in the Canadian Air Force. Much of that time was spent up north.
It gives one a lot of confidence when you're deploying up into the north and the weather predictions up there and the weather forecasts up there are not necessarily really the good. And it's hours later, or if you hit a tanker, it could be many hours later before you come back to base. And you don't know what you're going to get when you land. And now you have an airplane you have a lot of confidence in being able to handle the situations on the ground that you're going to have to handle as a pilot. The Super Hornet is, multi-role, multi-mission airplane. It employs a lot of very stealth design characteristics that I don't think a lot of people know about, and that it's not commonly understood because it's not necessarily termed a stealth plane. Internally, the avionics systems and how they work are a generation ahead. The radar is certainly a generation or even more ahead of what is in the current F-18s that Canada flies. The cockpit is a generation ahead. And so, it's called a Super Hornet because of its lines, but not because it's just a new and improved Hornet. It is a new airplane.
Because of the design similarities, Travin says acquiring the Super Hornet would afford Canada an almost seamless transition to the next generation of fighter aircraft.
It's very, very easy to transition from the Hornet to the Super Hornet because so much of the design philosophy remain the same. So the way the cockpit's laid out, the way the switch is laid out, the way you start it and shut it down, it's all very, very similar. And so, very simple, easy to fly. The other, I think, advantage that the Super Hornet brings is that it's made right now to be completely compatible with the current Hornet in terms of exchanging information between the airplanes through data links. So if a Super Hornet were to show up in Canada, the day one that airplane would show up in Canada, Canada would automatically have almost like a midlife update to its current Hornet fleet, because immediately it would begin working with the other Hornets and linking with them and sending them information through the link system from the ESA radar, for example, and making all airplanes suddenly more capable.
Boeing's program manager, Mike Gibbons, explained that because Boeing is both a producer of military and commercial aircraft, it can offer a dollar-for-dollar offset package, which would specifically benefit Canadian aerospace industry.
That dollar-for-dollar means that the Canadian companies would receive work that would be offset by something that Boeing is doing, and that something is not limited to the F-18 program. It could be a commercial aircraft like 787, 777, could be quite a bit of choices there, something from our space division, something from communications. We have a lot to offer.
Boeing's industrial benefits program is one potential reason for considering the Super Hornet in an open competitive bidding process. Another is the cost.
Well, right now we're under contract to the United States Navy for what's called multi-year 3, and our unit average cost that we guarantee to them is, when you add in some government furnished equipment like engines, is a little over $52 million. So obviously a very good value for the kind of capabilities they get.
What is the Liberal Party's position on where we're at now? I mean, what position would they take?
We would cancel that sole source process. We would not proceed with the acquisition as announced by the Conservatives last summer. We would hold an open public competition after making public the statement of requirements.
The Liberal Party's plan to scrap the deal and hold an open competition to replace the CF-18 has been met with a full-scale counteroffensive by the Harper government.
What are the Liberals and their friends in the NDP and the Bloc Québécois seriously suggesting? That after developing one aircraft, we'll go out and buy a second aircraft, so we'll have two aircrafts we're paying for instead of one? Are they suggesting we just won't buy an aircraft? We are buying it in a way that gets the best deal for Canada. We've been doing it with a process the previous government itself agreed to. Their position here is playing politics with the lives of our men and women in uniform, with the jobs of the people in this room, and we will not stand for it. And I'll tell you, the industry across this country isn't going to stand for this kind of behavior.
Because we disagree with the expenditure of this vast amount of money for an aircraft that still has many developmental challenges, it doesn't mean we've politicized the process. It's a little rich to pretend that somehow because you want to use taxpayers' money in what we think is a more effective, responsible way, somehow we've politicized the procurement process.
I think there has been a significant effort on the part of some to distort and quite frankly, politicize what, in my view, should be an issue of unanimous support.
I don't accept that. I don't accept that this is the only plane that Canada could get. I don't accept that it's the only choice. I don't accept that we should do that. I think that we have to go back to square one here and say, all right, the F-18s are going to run out of steam. What do we really need to replace them with?
I think the opposition parties also understand there's a real need out there, but I guess you can't really blame them for trying to play up the controversial aspects of the program for political reasons. But in the final analysis, common sense is going to prevail. The right airplane will be chosen for Canada, and that airplane, in my estimation, in the estimation of those who know the situation very well, is the F-35.
It could turn out to be the best aircraft. The way to find that out is run a competition. Get hard prices, get hard capabilities from all the contenders, and pick the one that best meets our needs. Not the US and UK's needs from the year 2000 or 2001, but our needs going into the years 2020 and onward.
If it is indeed the best aircraft for Canada, why not hold a competition?
We can go through a competition and we will come back to exactly the same answer. And I'll remind folks that we're one of 10 countries who have held a similar competition or similar analysis to replace their current fleets, and all 10 countries have come to the same conclusion. That's not a coincidence.
But a survey of newspaper headlines from JSF member countries undermines that claim. In Denmark, the political and economic costs are rising. It's the same story in the Netherlands. Reports say Norway has been under pressure by the U.S., even while its planes won't arrive on schedule. The deal has also been under intense scrutiny in Australia. Britain is expected to be scaling back its orders, and most recently, Turkey has decided to delay its decision to purchase up to 116 F-35s until December 2011. Given the delays in the development of the F-35, the uncertainty over its cost, and wavering commitments from all 9 international JSF partners, critics of the deal openly wonder what is behind the Harper government's unwavering and unflinching commitment to the F-35.
I have no doubt that the American Pentagon has put huge pressure on Canada, as it did on a number of other allies, including Israel. Some interesting information came out this week around the Israeli Air Force sort of believing that they were pushed into buying, I think, 20 F-35s.
Beware of the military-industrial complex. They have a lot of power. They have a tremendous amount of power in the United States, and I think we're seeing a lot of influence taking place in Canada, and the F-35 is probably the best example of that in recent years.
So you've got the Pentagon, the arms industry, and the Canadian military, and a government, a minority government, who needs to appease its conservative base. It's a perfect storm, and that's why they're going ahead with the F-35.
Secretary Gates has indicated that the F-35 will be the backbone of the U.S. Air Force tactical fleet for decades, and he expressed his appreciation for Canada's decision to make it ours.
So, is there a way forward that could satisfy the needs of the government, the concerns of its critics, and take some of the politics out of the procurement?
Now, I'm suggesting that you run a competition. At the end of the competition, we'll be a winner and we'll get something. If it turns out that the Joint Strike Fighter is the best one, we'll get that. If it turns out that one of the other models on the marketplace is right, we'll get that. So I don't see under any scenario where we're not going to get anything.
If you choose to use it, you have the freedom of action available to you to make an intelligent, affordable aircraft decision rather than press ahead with this rushed, expensive, performance crippling buy.
I think now Mr. Harper needs to decide that call a stop to Joint Strike Fighter as it stands at the moment, go to a competition. It may be that Joint Strike Fighter will come out on top, but having a competition will give transparency and take the heat out of the controversy.
We shouldn't fear a competition. It's a buyer's market. Any government that goes to the open market in a competition to buy fighter jets now is going to find companies pretty willing to make commitments both on price, on cost certainty around maintenance, and on industrial and regional benefits. So we shouldn't fear that process.
I think this is one of the most important procurements that we will see in our lifetime. So having an informed, dispassionate debate and making a case, I think, is what Canadians need, not some of the rhetorical flourish and the wild accusations and some of the distorted facts about the aircraft itself.
And we couldn't agree more. Over the past hour, it has been our intention to offer some insight into this complex and controversial military procurement. After all, it is the Canadian taxpayer who foots the bill for any government purchases, and therefore who should have a say in the political priorities which will shape the future of Canada's armed forces. For CPAC, I'm Scott Taylor.